Imagine waking up thousands of years ago. There are no houses around you, no shopping malls, no modern medicine, no machines, and definitely no clothing store. You look around. You're standing somewhere along the Nile Valley, surrounded by heat, sand, insects, wild animals, and a landscape that can change dramatically from one season to another. And then you notice something strange. The people around you are wearing clothes. Some are wrapped in simple pieces of animal hide, others are using plant fibers. And eventually, ancient Egyptians would become famous for one particular material: linen. But why? Why did humans start covering their bodies in the first place? Was it because of cold, protection, modesty, religion, or something much more interesting? And here's the surprising part: clothing did not begin with ancient Egypt. Humans were wearing some form of body covering long before the pyramids were ever built. But ancient Egypt gives us one of the clearest examples of how clothing evolved from simple survival technology into something much bigger. So let's go back before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, and before Egypt became one of the greatest civilizations in history. Because the story of Egyptian clothing actually begins with survival. Imagine living along the Nile thousands of years ago. You're walking through grasslands, you're hunting, you're gathering plants, you're fishing near the river, and your body is constantly exposed to the environment. Sharp plants can scratch you, insects can bite you, sunlight can burn your skin, and rough terrain can cause injuries. A simple piece of animal hide could provide protection. It didn't need to look beautiful, it didn't need to have a complicated design. It simply needed to work. Humans could use animal skins, plant fibers, and other natural materials to create basic coverings. And this is one of the most important ideas behind the history of clothing. The first clothes were probably technology. Just like a shelter protects you from the environment, clothing protects your body. Here's where things get interesting. Egypt is famous for its hot climate. So why would people want to wear clothes in such a hot environment? Because heat isn't the only environmental problem. The desert sun can be brutal. A lightweight covering can protect skin from direct sunlight, and certain fabrics can allow air to move around the body while still providing protection. Later, ancient Egyptians became especially skilled at producing linen. Linen comes from the flax plant. The fibers can be processed and spun into thread. Those threads can then be woven into fabric, and suddenly, a simple plant becomes clothing. But ancient Egyptian clothing wasn't just about survival anymore, it was becoming part of society. Imagine an ancient Egyptian worker standing beside a field of flax. The plants are harvested, the fibers are separated, they are processed, spun into thread, and finally woven into cloth. This required knowledge. It required tools, and it required time. The result was a lightweight fabric that was extremely useful in Egypt's climate. Linen became one of the most important materials in ancient Egyptian clothing. Simple garments could be made from it. More elaborate garments could also be produced, and the quality of the fabric could vary. This is where clothing starts telling us something important about ancient Egyptian society, because not everyone wore exactly the same thing. Imagine two people standing next to each other in ancient Egypt. The quality of the fabric can differ. The amount of material can differ. The decoration can differ. Jewelry can differ. And suddenly, clothing is no longer just protecting your body, it's communicating something. It can tell people, who are you? How wealthy are you? What is your position in society? And sometimes, what role do you have? This happens in many civilizations. Once humans have enough resources to make clothing more comfortable and decorative, clothing becomes part of social identity. Ancient Egypt was no exception. But there was another important layer: religion. Ancient Egyptian society was deeply connected to religion. Clothing, jewelry, and appearance could all become part of religious and ceremonial life. Priests, officials, rulers, and ordinary people could have different clothing traditions and expectations. And during ceremonies, appearance mattered. The clothing wasn't simply something you put on because you were cold. It could become part of a person's role, a symbol of purity, a symbol of status, a symbol of authority, and in the world of the pharaohs, appearance could be extremely powerful. Here's the part that often gets misunderstood. We cannot point to one exact day and say, this is when humans invented clothing. Clothing is organic. Animal skins, plant fibers, and other materials can disappear over thousands of years. So archaeologists often have to rely on indirect evidence. One fascinating clue comes from genetics. Scientists have studied body lice and clothing lice. Clothing lice live primarily in clothing rather than directly on the human body. Their genetic history suggests that humans were using clothing long before ancient Egyptian civilization. That means by the time the pyramids were being built, Clothing was already an extremely old human technology. Ancient Egyptians didn't invent clothing. They inherited a technology that humans had been developing for thousands of years, and then they perfected it for their environment and society. Think about how strange that transformation really is. At first, a covering protects your skin, then it protects you from the environment. Then humans learn to make better materials. They develop weaving. They create different styles. Different people wear different garments. And eventually, clothing becomes part of culture, part of religion, part of status, part of identity. Something that began as simple survival technology becomes a language. You don't need to speak. Your clothing can speak for you. It can tell people where you belong, what you do, how wealthy you are, and what role you play in society. Ancient Egyptian clothing was often remarkably practical. In a hot environment, heavy layers aren't always useful. Lightweight linen makes sense. Loose garments can allow movement, and simple designs can be easier to produce and maintain. So the clothing of ancient Egypt wasn't random. It was shaped by the environment, by available materials, by technology, by social class, and by culture. That is why looking at something as simple as a piece of ancient fabric can tell us so much about the people who made it. So, why did humans in ancient Egypt start wearing clothes? The answer isn't one single reason. Protection was important. Climate mattered. Available materials mattered. Technology mattered. And eventually, culture and social identity mattered too. But the deeper story goes even further. Humans didn't simply start wearing clothes because they wanted to look different. They learned to transform the environment around them into something that could protect their bodies. Animal skin became clothing, flax became linen, fibers became thread, thread became fabric, and fabric became part of civilization. Thousands of years later, when we look at an ancient Egyptian statue, we often notice the pharaoh, the crown, the jewelry, the temples, the pyramids. But look more closely. Look at the fabric. Look at the way it's wrapped. Look at the material. Because behind that simple piece of cloth is thousands of years of human experimentation, thousands of years of survival, thousands of years of technology, and thousands of years of culture. The story of clothing isn't really a story about fashion. It's a story about how humans learn to survive, adapt, communicate, and eventually turn something as simple as a piece of material into a symbol of civilization.